Hello, my name is Brian Lowry. I'm a columnist and critic with Variety. As part of Media Literacy Week, we are having this conversation here with about media literacy, and are joined by what are we would refer to as thought leaders on the topic. To my left is Liebe Geft, who is the director of the Museum of Tolerance. Mark Slavkin, the director of education at the Wallis Annenberg Center for the Performing Arts, and Tessa Jolls, who is the president of the Center for Media Literacy. Tessa, you mentioned everyone being a producer in a way because we all are so immersed in media. I wonder if each of you could address, do you feel like the consumers are more sophisticated about media, or are they somewhat deluded that they're more sophisticated about media just because they're up to their eyeballs in it? In a sense. And Tessa, you might want to start with that.
Is this democratization of media that's going on. And so people can press buttons, they can use the technology in many cases, but it doesn't mean that they're always using media wisely or critically. And so they need to really learn the process skills that go along with using media wisely and responsibly. And so that's really where we start with media literacy, is with the idea of critical thinking and how important that is, and how important it is to learn a process and a methodology for taking media apart and putting it back together again so that these wiser choices can be made.
The question is, I wonder if we have time for critical thinking. If you're scrolling through 100 headlines in 4 minutes, and that's the pace of it, I worry that too few people click on you might share an article online that you think is incredibly important and profound. It's scary to me and a little disappointing, the statistics on how few people will click and actually read through that article beyond just zipping through the headline. So I think critical thinking does take the element of time, and we're losing that. I think it's hard, no matter how sort of well educated you are and how attuned you are to make meaning from symbols and the ways that things can be manipulated, if the pace is, I can't do more than 2 seconds per issue or idea. To read an entire book now, I worry that doesn't happen anymore, let alone an entire long-length article that's 3 or 5 pages. So it seems that we're more at risk to propaganda than ever. If all the headlines appear in the same font, the one that says the Holocaust never happened looks by letter and typeface exactly the same as the one that says we're memorializing those who passed during the Holocaust. When do we take the time to dig deeper to apply those tools? So not to be a pessimist about it, but I think that our world has been disrupted and we haven't figured out yet a way out of it to allow this flood of information to be applied appropriately. I think right now the information flood is winning, and wisdom and critical insight and critical thinking are losing.
As part of the information flood, I can tell you're right, but go ahead, please.
I think what Mark is saying is raising our awareness of the fact that we are living in the midst of a tectonic shift, and what the former Chief Rabbi of the UK, Lord Jonathan Sacks, writes very eloquently about in his book, The Dignity of Difference, a major revolution that is profoundly changing humanity and civilization. And he likens it to the great revolutions of the invention of writing, of the alphabet, and printing, and saying that global communications, instantaneous global communications of the kind that we're discussing, is the next great revolution. And we will not know for a great deal of time what the consequences are, but the ramifications, even the immediate ramifications, are staggering. And information technologies, more than any others, that change the way, that absolutely alter the way we speak, the way we think, the way we frame our experience, the way we make sense of it, has a profound impact on the democratization of human dignity. So what we're talking about is a revolution on the scale of the great changes in civilization. No wonder we haven't yet come to terms with how do we grapple with this flood of information. And the fact that there is so much that we just bombarded by it. Now is the most important time to train ourselves to stop, to examine, to reflect, because yes, it all looks absolutely equal. It's very difficult to discern between something that is malicious or something that is authentic. In marking Media Literacy Week, all week in the museum, we had a presentation earlier today by one of the researchers in the Task Force Against Hate, an expose on the Holocaust denial sites. They look as erudite and authentic as anything else that one might find. And historical revisionism is not just about the Holocaust. Teachers, everyone is going to the internet now for so-called research and has no idea who is putting this out, what is their intention, whose voice is not being heard. How do you know to differentiate between an authentic site and one that is purely malicious and manipulative in its intent? So we are facing an enormous challenge, and never before has there been a time where where becoming literate is important. Walter J. Ong wrote this wonderful Orality and Literacy, and if I paraphrase his words, he says that technologies are not mere exterior aids. They are also interior transformations of consciousness, and never more so than when they impact the world. And I think that's what we're dealing with now. When you ask, is it important in what we do? It is absolutely vitally the focus of what we do.
Is it already, or if you can chart it, I don't know if you can go back, 5 years or 10 years, but have you seen that the way you have to engage audiences, and I would say, I guess especially younger audiences, has it fundamentally changed because of this sort of bombardment of media images and devices that they have access to now?
There's been a radical shift in the way in which museums and other educational institutions are engaging audiences. It is much faster, it is more interactive, there is an expectation that you can touch a screen and instantaneously elicit the material that you're seeking. You see it with the differences in the age of the audiences when we put in these touchscreen interactives. My grandson had to teach me how to move this thing with one button, but he didn't hesitate for 1 second. He knows exactly what to do, and when to swipe and when to touch, and everything has changed. We do have different expectations, and it is happening. I don't think we should try to resist it or criticize it. I think we need to understand it and adapt to it in ways that don't just carry us with the tide, but that we can actually formulate and navigate our journey through this, knowing that there are enormous dangers, tremendous peril, as well as unprecedented possibilities.
Oh, there's a part of me that does want to push back. And you may be right that there's nothing we can do about it. Like, the battle's already been lost. We're in the world that we're in. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. But there's a part of me that I think would like to, rather than sort of succumb to the cliche, people don't have any attention span, they can't handle more than tiny little bursts, everything needs to be in little bite-sized little increments, that we're doing the world a disservice if we go down that path and say, yeah, let's reorder all of our institutions and the way we do things to that lowest common, not that you're saying that, but that versus no, some institutions need to push back and say, this is long, this make you squirm because it's longer than you want, but it's good for you. You're going to have to confront something in a way that you're not used to, but it's good for you. In the performing arts world, that debate goes on every day between the orthodoxy of this is the way it's always been done, and others saying, let them tweet during this show, put video screens behind the orchestra. Anything that creates a hook to get them is worth doing, because otherwise we're going to lose them. Versus no, if this can't be an institution that stands for a more refined engagement with ideas and information, who will? So I think there's this tension in lots of institutions, including schools, that we're designed to be top down and have authority decide what are the facts you should know and ensure that all kids know the same things. So kids walk into with cell phones in their pocket, and most schools say, put that away, you can't use it, that's forbidden. We may give you an iPad with a preset curriculum on it that will let you dabble with, but you can't have open access to the internet, even though you live with that the other 20 hours a day when you're not in school. So who has that authority to prescribe or to limit that flow of information to some big ideas that we really want you to think about, versus all of us saying, we've lost the battle, we'll never control it, just give them the tools to make meaning on their own. So that's something that I grapple with.
I certainly didn't want to imply that we should give up. I said very specifically we don't go with the flow. It is up to us to ensure that we are navigating the path through it. But we're not going to stop a technological revolution of the kind that is underway.
Right.
And there are infinite possibilities and great potential for it as well. But I absolutely agree that the tail shouldn't be wagging the dog. And we don't need to cater to the lowest common denominator. And it shouldn't all be technologies. That's why we still have artifacts in museums. There's still very carefully crafted text. And yes, there are longer engagements in this museum with personal testimony and with video media, because it's extremely important that one understands the concepts and the history and all of the important dynamics that we're trying to convey. But maybe it's not a bad thing if people use their cell phones when they're in a museum in order to access the deeper information in an exhibit where there isn't space on the wall to write it all, but with a little QR code or whatever it's called. Our media person is sitting there, you can help me, Helen. You simply hold up your cell phone and you'll get that information. Or books that we've produced now. We did a wonderful exhibition of Holocaust survivors, an art exhibit. They came together with their families and put together their life story in artistic form, in the form of a collage. Well, many of these people had also made recordings with the Spielberg Visual History Foundation, the Shoah Foundation at USC. And so we have a little code next to it in the book. And if you hold your cell phone over it with the app, the video will come up, and there's a little video snippet which brings it to life. So it can enrich the experience by giving greater depth, by allowing for deeper exploration. It doesn't have to just be a quick touch this button, turn this knob, flick the switch, and out you go. But the challenge is very real, and we have to figure out how to do it.
I'm both saying is that there are changes going on with technology that really are impacting the way we learn and the way we educate children. Today we don't have so much, or hopefully we're headed to a place where we don't have so much of the factory-based education, where everybody gets the same thing. There's the success is measured more on the basis of seat time and how much time you spend in school, as opposed to the idea of anywhere, anytime learning. And so learning doesn't only happen in the classroom, it can happen in a museum, it can happen at a theater, it can happen in many different venues. And so with all of the information that we now have, we really need an educational approach that's more bottoms up and that teaches a process so that the individual can more quickly analyze, more quickly discern. But that takes a lot of practice. It takes a methodology and it takes practice over time to really gain those skills. And so what we're saying is that young people aren't going to school now to learn content knowledge, because content knowledge is infinitely available. Instead, content knowledge is available at a fingertip, and so instead we need the process skills. And that's really where the big change is, I think, and the technology supports that.